Early 1944, Nazi Germany. Allied bombing raids have reduced the fighter aircraft production of German factories by as much as 2/3. In order to reduce the effectiveness of Allied bombing, the German Armaments Ministry, led by Albert Speer and the SS, agreed to accelerate construction of massive underground factories to move production there. New concrete bunkers using concentration camp prisoners are to be built because existing underground areas such as caves and mines are not suited to factory production. In 1944 and 1945, hundreds of satellite camps attached to major concentration camps are established throughout the German Reich, where inmates are forced to hollow out the sides of mountains or caves for immense systems of tunnels and factories to develop and build new weaponry, such as remote-controlled anti-aircraft rockets or strategic bombers that would be capable of striking the United States from Germany. One such camp becomes Ebensee, which will be operational for 1.5 years and claim the lives of at least 8,200 people, 1/3 of the prisoners held there. They will be subject to brutal mistreatment, torture, and starvation. However, after the camp's liberation, the freed prisoners will take extremely violent revenge for the atrocities inflicted upon them. Between 1940 and 1945, the SS authorities established nearly 50 subcamps in the Mauthausen concentration camp system. These subcamps were generally located in the vicinity of factories, stone quarries, and mines, in which SS labor allocation officers deployed prisoners transferred from the Mauthausen main camp. Among the most important of these subcamps was Ebensee, codenamed Cement, which was located in the direct vicinity of the town of Ebensee in Upper Austria. Together with the Mauthausen subcamp of Gusen, Ebensee, established on the 18th of November 1943, belonged to one of the harshest concentration camps ever built. The majority of the prisoners of Ebensee had been transferred over from Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, and the first big transport of 1,000 prisoners from Mauthausen arrived in Ebensee on the 19th of November 1943, one day after the establishment of the camp. There was nearly no accommodation to protect the first batch of prisoners from the cold Austrian winter, and the death toll increased astronomically. Bodies were piled in heaps, and every 3 or 4 days they were taken to the Mauthausen Crematorium to be burned, as Ebensee did not yet have its own crematorium. The dead were also piled inside the few huts that existed, and the smell of the dead, combined with sickness, phlegm, urine, and feces, was unbearable. By mid-1944, Ebensee eventually had its own crematorium with an enormous single chimney which rose high into the air. Other buildings were built as well. In one of them, Block 23, the dead and the living dead were piled together in large heaps. When the camp was at full strength, as many as 600 prisoners lay on the bare floor at one time. On one day, in April 1945, a record number of 80 bodies were removed from Block 23 alone. The main purpose of Ebensee was to provide slave labor for the construction of enormous tunnels in the mountains in which armaments works, safe from bombing, were to be housed, as well as the development of the Waterfall and American bomber projects. While Waterfall was a guided supersonic surface-to-air missile development project, the America Bomber Project was an initiative of the German Ministry of Aviation to obtain a long-range strategic bomber for the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, that would be capable of striking the United States, specifically New York City from Germany, a round-trip distance of about 11,600 kilometers or 7,200 miles. Both projects were not completed. Though the production of tank transmissions was planned to be carried out inside Tunnel System A, the project was replaced with a setup of an underground refinery as fuel production became a priority. Crude oil distillation in Tunnel System A, which was almost completed by the time the war ended, started in February 1945. In Tunnel System B, which by the end of the war was 60% completed, the manufacture of ball bearings was underway. As early as May 1944, 5,000 prisoners were held at the Ebensee subcamp, and by the end of the year, it was over 9,000. The highest number of prisoners present at the same time was 18,509, which was reached on the 23rd of April, 1945. At that time, the overcrowding was so bad at Ebensee that more prisoners died daily than could be handled by the crematorium. 4,547 out of a total population of 16,000 perished in Ebensee in April 1945. In total, about 27,000 prisoners were held captive at Ebensee. The living conditions in Ebensee were worse than in most of the other subcamps. The camp was surrounded by a barbed wire fence, small towers with machine guns, and shacks for the SS. New prisoners were sometimes held in quarantine for 2 weeks to break them both physically and mentally. The prisoners wore wooden clogs, and when the clogs fell apart, the inmates had to go barefoot because there were not enough shoes. This was especially tormenting during the long winter from November 1943 to June 1944, when the last remnants of snow were only just disappearing and the prisoners sometimes had to remain barefoot. The prisoners were also otherwise insufficiently clothed. Barracks were not heated, there were no baths, lice infested the camp, and sawdust from mattresses caused prisoners to suffer. The work in the aforementioned tunnels was ordered by the supervisors often as a repressive measure. The prisoners worked 11-hour shifts unless they were working in the tunnels, when they worked in one of 3 8-hour shifts. Rations were insufficient, with the average daily ration being around 700 calories. They consisted of half a liter of coffee for breakfast, 3/4 of a liter of hot water containing potato peelings for lunch, and 150 grams of bread with water for dinner. Prisoners were always hungry, and about a third of prisoners were constantly on the edge of starvation. Those who worked within the camp and were placed in, for instance, administrative tasks, did not have to labor as strenuously as those assigned to work outside the camp. Many companies were employed to oversee the work on tunnel construction, and these companies provided civilian workers who each supervised several prisoners in the work. The SS, wanting to please the companies, sought to provide them with the number of prisoners they requested, even if those prisoners were dying. SS soldiers and appointed prisoner functionaries, called Kapos, also oversaw prisoners with varying degrees of brutality. When new inmates arrived in the camp, the veteran inmates soon informed them that there was only one way to leave, through the crematorium chimney. Ebensee was made up of several groups of prisoners, such as prisoners of war, political prisoners, criminals, as well as Roma and Sinti people. There were inmates of 20 different nationalities in Ebensee, including Poles, Russians, Hungarians, Italians, and Spaniards. The death rate for Italian prisoners in Ebensee was 53%. The reason was that after Mussolini's fall in 1943, Italians were marked as traitors by both their communist and fascist fellow prisoners and the National Socialists. Of the 955 Italian prisoners, 512 died. The lowest death rate, 0.9%, was for the Spanish prisoners. The first Jews arrived in Ebensee in early June 1944, and they made up approximately 1/3 of the inmates. They were subjected to extremely cruel treatment, and as a result, their mortality rate was almost 40%, much higher than that of the rest of the camp population. When, for instance, on the 3rd of March 1945, over 2,000 Jewish prisoners arrived from the Wolfsberg subcamp of Gross-Rosen, the Ebensee commandant, Anton Ganz, forced them to remain outside during snowy weather for almost 2 days. Hundreds of them died of exhaustion caused by transport to the camp and of exposure. The first commandant of Ebensee was Georg Bachmayer, who turned it into one of the most diabolical concentration camps ever built. One of the most favorite methods of torture was to tie a prisoner's arms behind him, with a hand side by side and thumb to thumb, and then suspend them from a tree about 18 inches off the ground. Bachmayer would then release his favorite dog, an Alsatian called Lord, to attack the prisoners, who would be left to die a slow and agonizing death. Bachmayer was replaced in his position by SS Hauptsturmführer Alfons Benteler, and in early 1944, Obersturmbannführer Otto Riemer was appointed as the new commandant in Ebensee. During the period of his command, the conditions deteriorated even further. He personally beat, shot, and tortured prisoners daily. He openly offered extra cigarettes and leave to those sentries who could account for the largest number of deaths. If a sentry at the end of a day did not have a sufficient number to his credit, he would knock off the cap of a prisoner and throw it into a forbidden area. When the prisoner went to retrieve it, he would be shot dead. Riemer, like Bachmayer, was a great lover of wine and women, and he would often go to wild drinking parties with some of the younger members of the SS. On one occasion, on the 18th of May 1944, he returned to camp after an all-night drinking session with 12 of his SS command. They entered the camp shooting wildly with their pistols and roaring with delight as panic-stricken prisoners scurried out of their way. 15 prisoners died as a result of this display. After this, Riemer was demoted and transferred to the Gusen concentration camp post office. The last commandant of Ebensee became SS Hauptsturmführer Anton Ganz. The Kapos were especially cruel. The leader of Block 19 would wait for his prisoners to return from the day's toil, and then compel them to perform exhausting physical exercises far into the night. The following morning, after a sleepless night, the men would be forced out to another full day's work. Nearly all of the members of his block died from exhaustion within 10 days. By this system of elimination, he had succeeded in killing the prisoners in a most economical manner and was rewarded. When Wels, another subcamp of Mauthausen, was constructed, he became the camp leader. As the war was coming to an end, the mass evacuation from other camps put tremendous pressure on the Mauthausen complex, which was the last remaining camp in the area of Nazi power. The 25 Ebensee barracks were designed to hold 100 prisoners each, but at this time, some of them held 750 each. There were also prisoners who were kept in the tunnel systems and outside under the open sky. The crematorium was unable to keep pace with the deaths, and the naked bodies lay stacked up outside the blocks and the crematorium itself. At the closing weeks of the war, the death rate exceeded 350 a day. The camp commandant Anton Ganz ordered 2 secret mass graves to be dug to dispose of the 2,167 dead bodies. The bodies were flung into the quicklime, and amongst the pile, feet were seen to be twitching. In early May 1945, shooting in the distance could be heard from inside the camp, and there was a sense among the prisoners that American and British forces were close at hand. On the 5th of May, the camp commandant Anton Ganz tried to get the remaining prisoners to enter one of the mountain tunnels. However, they refused, remained in their barracks, and the camp staff left, leaving only elderly Germans armed with rifles to guard the camp. When the prisoners realized that the SS had deserted the camp, they killed 52 camp functionaries who had collaborated with the SS to create the camp's hierarchy. Soon after the liberation, the American troops found that the tunnel into which the Ebensee commandant had tried to lure the remaining inmates, allegedly to protect them, was full of explosives. By refusing to enter the tunnel, the prisoners had saved themselves from being blown up by the Germans. Of the 27,000 prisoners who were held captive at Ebensee, more than 8,200 prisoners died before the liberation, making the death rate for Ebensee subcamp 31%. After the liberation, the American troops requisitioned local food and made soup for the prisoners. However, a few died of a ruptured stomach due to the fact that they had not eaten solid food for so long. In total, over 730 prisoners died in the weeks after their liberation, as a result of their imprisonment, and 1,000 stayed in hospitals for an extended period of time. Ben Ferencz, the chief prosecutor for the United States Army at the Einsatzgruppen trial, who in May 1945 took part in the Ebensee liberation and investigated occurrences there, recalled the following. I directed a group of passing Germans to help bury the bodies of inmates strewn along the campgrounds. There, some inmates caught one of the SS guards as he was trying to flee. Judging by the violence of the assault, he may have been the camp commandant. First he was beaten mercilessly, then the mob tied him to one of the metal trays used to slide bodies into the crematorium. There, he was slowly roasted alive, taking him in and out of the oven several times. I watched it happen and did nothing. It was not my duty to stop it, even if I could have, and frankly, I was not inclined to try. There seemed to be no limit to human brutality in wartime. I headed back to Munich to write my reports. They would serve as the basis for later war crimes prosecutions. I was grateful that the war was coming to an end. I learned that there never has been, and never will be, a war without atrocities. The only way to prevent such cruel crimes was to prevent war itself. There were many tears shed for all the victims of the Ebensee concentration camp. Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.